Welcome into Crystal Ball College Football. I'm your host, Grayson Grunhafer, and how about the wild week we just had in college football? Lots to talk about. We're going to get through it all this week, but today I felt like it was really important to talk about this new Big 12 media deal. It's obviously huge news that happened just a day ago, and it was something that I feel like kind of changes the landscape of college football just a little bit, just slightly. We know where everything's at with the Big Ten, the SEC, but for the Pac-12 and the Big 12 and the ACC as well, this was pretty big news in my eyes. So CBS Sports writer Dennis Dodd, as well as the Sports Business Journal, released the information about the new Big 12 deal. It's a 6-year, $2.3 billion deal, ESPN and Fox. It starts after the 2025 season. So coming to effect 2025-2026, which is after Texas and Oklahoma leave. And that's going to run through the 2031 season. So 6 years in there. And we'll get into kind of what that means and my thoughts on how long that deal is as well. I think that's a pretty big deal. Of course, the Big 12 is going to welcome BYU, UCF, Houston, Cincinnati, Texas, and OU are leaving to the SEC. So let's just talk about the money real quick, because I know that's where the attention goes to immediately. And kind of how it's been broken down, at least in my eyes, is 31.6 million is the number that all the teams are going to get. That's kind of your base, right? But then when you add in bowls, college football playoff, NCAA tournament, that number is expected to grow by 16 million. And that is before the expansion and the new media rights deal for the college football playoff. So before we get into that, it gets you to about $47.5 million. You add in the expanded playoff, and that's why everyone's talking about the number being over 50, which many people are reporting it could probably get around 55 million. If you have years where you get multiple playoff teams, you're going to get more than that. But I think the number to kind of work with once the playoff is expanded, which it will be by the time this deal comes into effect, I would count on it being somewhere between 50 to 55 million annually per team. Now, what does that mean, right? In the Big Ten, that number is going to exceed 100 million. In the SEC, that number is going to exceed 100 million, as their base, I think, is right around 70-something million. That's before the college football playoff stuff. So they'll be over 100. The Big 12 will be in the 50s. And that's solid. That's solid. That puts you ahead of the ACC by a lot, which is hilarious. Absolutely hilarious that UCF is going to be making way more money than Florida State and Miami. But we'll get into that in a little bit. I just think that's one of the funniest things that has come out of this, is that you got teams like UCF, Cincinnati, who are just sitting in the American about to make $4 million a year, and they're going to be making over 50. So quite polar opposites in that direction. And, you know, as far as the Big 12 goes, I just think realistically, this is the best they could have hoped for, and also kind of a realization of their goals, right? Because Brett Yormark came in to be the Big 12 commissioner, took over for Bob Bowlesby, and he made it very clear that they were going to be aggressive. They were going to get a deal done. It was going to be a good deal for the conference. And overall, this is a good deal for the conference. And anyone that was thinking they were going to be making $100 million like the SEC and the Big Ten, that wasn't realistic. But anyone that thought they were going to be, you know, in the 20s or in the 30s and things like that, that was a lie as well. And so you're somewhere in between. You're in that $50 million range, which continues to make you competitive as a conference, allows you to make upgrades to your facilities, allows you to grow your budget. And in my eyes, it makes you more attractive than other conferences as well, such as the ACC and the Pac-12. And that's just the reality of the situation. And I think, you know, kind of how this all came about, right? And kind of what Brett Yormark was selling up to this point was competitive balance, which we're seeing this year already with Texas and Oklahoma still in the conference. You're seeing just crazy competitive balance in which, you know, maybe a 3-loss team is going to get into the Big 12 championship game. I mean, it's crazy. Every game is entertaining. Every game seems to be close outside of the one that happened in Manhattan this past weekend. But most games are very close, very competitive, even when you're playing the worst team in the conference versus the best team in the conference. Kind of like what we saw West Virginia versus TCU. Very competitive game. Once again, that was attractive. The other part was men's basketball. And I think if you look at the Big 12, it's the best basketball conference in the country. I know Big 10 fans will get mad about it, but it's facts. And the Big 12 over the last 3 years, they have 2 national champions, and the year that they don't was a COVID year in which no one played in the NCAA tournament, but they were about to have 2 1 seeds with Kansas and Baylor. So they have Kansas, a traditional blue blood. Everyone knows that's a powerhouse program. You have Baylor, who is a new blood in my eyes. They have a national championship, 2 Big 12 championships. So they're a team that's definitely on the rise, getting close to being in that blue blood conversation. But then you also look at, and you got Texas Tech, you got Houston, you got Cincinnati, like programs that are very good at basketball, especially over recent history. Houston, of course, has a long, long tradition, but this is a great conference for basketball. And that was a big selling point as well, to be able to add that to the content flow for whatever media entity they were going to go with. And of course, ESPN and Fox, very appealing for them as well. So now let's look at kind of the Pac-12, right? So I think the Big 12 beating the Pac-12 was massive. The Pac-12's window is closed. Their exclusive negotiating window is closed, and they look like they're trending towards streaming. And while streaming seems appealing and seems like something that could be very profitable in the future, the reality is right now, I just don't see how that's going to be more profitable than what the Big 12 got. And so now the Pac-12 is kind of sitting there as, what are they going to do? What are they going to end up with? And what kind of money are they going to make? And how appealing is that going to be for the teams that are left in that conference? I don't know the answer to it, but I would hazard to guess that I don't think they're going to get close to what the Big 12 is getting. I think they'll probably be maybe in the low 40s, and the Big 12's in the high 50s. That's $10 million difference per school. I think that's a pretty big deal. And I think the gap could be something along those lines. Now, another part about this, and I mentioned it at the top, the deal ends in 2031. Now, to put that in perspective, the SEC media deal ends in 2034. The ACC grant of rights deal ends in 2036. So it allows the Big 12 to have another negotiation window before those two conferences are out of their contracts. That's pretty crazy, and that's a good thing, right? Because you get ahead of things by being the first one on the block there, and you might also be able to look at potentially adding schools or try to look at the landscape then as opposed to now and actually be able to do something and have wiggle room, whereas we're seeing the ACC is basically just being held hostage right now by a grant of rights deal that is honestly just draining money from the top programs in that conference and just allowing those lower programs like a Wake Forest to just kind of hang on right in there and making the same amount of money as North Carolina and Miami and Florida State. It's pretty crazy. And I have a feeling that those programs are going to get really sick of that really quickly, especially after seeing this Big 12 deal. But outside of that, I think I mentioned UCF. They were going to make $4 million in the American. Now they're going to make $50 million a year. That's going to be more than Florida State and Miami. Wow. That's pretty eye-popping in my eyes when I saw that and thought about it and just put into context that UCF is going to be more valuable media rights terms compared to Miami and Florida State. Who would have thought? What a move by UCF, right? To get into the Big 12. Pretty crazy that they were able to. And so that's it. That is the new Big 12 media rights deal. Pretty great. Brett Yormark, congratulations. The Big 12 is in a much better spot now than it was a couple days ago. And who would have thought? A lot of people were saying with OU and Texas gone, there was nothing the Big 12 was going to be able to do to get money back or to be able to make more money. And actually, they're making more per school now than they would be currently with Texas and OU. Obviously, if those two schools would have stayed, they would be more profitable. But that was just never the reality of the situation. So at the end of the day, the Big 12 in a great spot moving forward. So thanks for listening today. I'll have previews and recaps and, of course, my best bets at the end of this week. But thanks for listening to Crystal Ball College Football.